The sound of insects chirping in the dry grass of the Tuscan countryside, a land of rolling hills and somber cypress trees, located about 145 miles northwest of Rome. The sound of the wind mingling with the rustle of silver-white olive leaves under the moonlight. Welcome to Mind Manor. Before we begin tonight's journey, if you enjoy these moments of relaxation, please hit the like and subscribe button to support me. And leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from and at what time, so we can all know where your evening is beginning. Now, let the current world fade into the darkness and allow your mind to drift freely toward an era of magnificent palaces and cold-blooded intrigues. The hazy night mist begins to envelop the trails leading to Florence, the city that the ancient Romans once called Florentia, the flower in bloom, a radiant center nestled along the Arno River. You feel the chill of the night brushing against your face, the cold of one who has just passed through the ups and downs, the glory and the disgrace of power. Inside the small house at Sant'Andrea in Percasina, just about 7 miles south of Florence, the flickering yellow candlelight dances on the stone walls, creating long, lingering shadows like the ghosts of the past waiting to be heard. You stand there in the doorway of your cramped study, shedding the mud-stained peasant clothes of a long, weary day and putting on the formal robes of an ambassador. The warmth of the velvet fabric touches your skin, carrying the weight of memories, of confrontations with monarchs, of the breath of death in the dungeon, and of a burning desire to revive a lost empire. Do not rush. Take a deep breath. Feel the scent of India ink and old parchment spreading through the room. Tonight, you are not just a listener. You are Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who looked straight into the demon in the human heart to seek the light of truth. Let the sound of your own footsteps on the cool wooden floor lead you into a journey of intellect and stillness, where schemes become poetry and power becomes a philosophical melody. Now, close your eyes. Let the gentle darkness of history embrace you. And we begin the journey back to those first days, under the shadow of the great Lorenzo. The bells from the bell tower of the Santo Spirito Church echo through the narrow alleys of the Oltrarno district, melting into the still air of a May afternoon in 1469. You open your eyes to the first light of your life in Florence, a city whose beauty is sometimes so radiant that it makes people forget the intrigues lurking beneath the layers of marble. You are Niccolò di Bernardo de Machiavelli, and the world you have just entered is a giant chessboard, where the pieces are moved not only by the hands of the gods, but by the ambition and cold calculation of men. The chill from the stone walls of the Palazzo Machiavelli seeps through your swaddling clothes, reminding you of a naked truth from your very first breath. You were born into a family with a noble name, but that name is now merely a dry shell. Your Machiavelli lineage once bore the flag of justice, those who held the fate of Florence in their hands. 13 high-ranking officials once stood at the pinnacle of power, but by the time of your father, Bernardo, that legacy was nothing more than piles of tax records and ancestral debts. You feel the crampedness of the house near the south bank of the Arno River, where 30 people of the same blood must share every centimeter of living space. It is a painful juxtaposition that you soon realize. Outside, Florence claims to be the center of the world, but inside this house, poverty is gnawing away at every meal. Your father, a lawyer thoroughly versed in tax law, is himself the victim of the harshest statutes. Because of the public debts left behind by your grandfather from failed cloth businesses, your father was stripped of the right to participate in the government. Florentine law does not allow the children of debtors to touch the levers of power. You stand there, a boy observing the world through the cracks of history. You wonder, if the law was born to execute justice, why does it punish a child for the mistakes of his ancestors? Or is justice in fact merely a tool of the winners to keep the losers forever at the bottom? Your mother, Bartolomea, is a gentle note in the music full of your father's calculations. She sits there, by the window, her hands telling beads, or lightly touching the keys of an instrument. She is a rare woman of this era who knows how to read, write, and manage small businesses to keep the family from collapsing. From her warmth, you learn that virtue can exist in silence. But from the austerity on your father's face, you understand that knowledge without power is like a sword without a blade. The year 1469 was not only the year you were born, it was the year a specter of power began to loom over Florence. Lorenzo de' Medici. As you take your first steps on the paved streets, Lorenzo, at the age of 20, begins to hold the fate of this entire city-state. You see the magnificence of Florence under his hand. The paintings of Botticelli, the marble blocks gradually taking shape under the hand of Michelangelo, and the soaring ideas of Leonardo da Vinci. He made Florence the cultural center of Europe, while quietly strangling its democratic institutions. This contradiction is etched into your mind like a scar. Florence preached Christian virtue while practicing cutthroat commerce. You walk through the squares, hearing priests condemn usury from pulpits, while bankers calculated interest rates in the pews. This world is a cave of Plato, and most of humanity is merely preoccupied with watching the shadows dancing on the cave walls, mistaking them for reality. You do not want to be a sleepwalker. You want to turn your head, to look straight into the sunlight, even if it might blind you. Your father did not have the money to give you a life of luxury, but he gave you a greater treasure: books. In the small, dust-covered library, the scent of old parchment and India ink mingles into a heady flavor of the past. Your hands touch the pages of Cicero, of Virgil, and especially Livy. Your father saved every florin to buy these books instead of expensive clothes. He taught you that these disciplines nurture the values we principally need in order to serve our country well. At age 7, you begin to learn to control the quill pen on rough sheets of paper. At age 11, you begin your battle with numbers on the abacus. And by age 12, under the guidance of the priest Paolo da Ronciglione, you enter the labyrinth of Latin. You are not just learning grammar, you are learning the way the ancient Romans thought. You translate the letters of Cicero, mimicking the sharpness of his style. You realize that words are not just for communication. Words are weapons. What happens if virtue, in the traditional sense, is actually a weakness? That question begins to sprout within you as you read about Roman generals who were willing to sacrifice personal morality for the survival of the state. You understand that the things that shape a boy of tender years will ever afterward regulate his conduct. The biggest turning point comes in 1476. Your father, with the meticulousness of a lawyer, spent months indexing the history of Rome by Titus Livius. When that copy was brought home, it was not just a book, It was a door leading you away from cramped Florence to the greatness of the Roman Empire. You and your father pore over every page of history, analyzing why an empire can rise and why it falls. You learn that history is an eternal loop of ambitions, but reality always knows how to pull you out of ancient dreams with its brutality. In 1478, when you were only 9 years old, the sound of alarm bells rang incessantly from the cathedral. The Pazzi conspiracy exploded. Blood was spilled right on the floor of the Holy Church. You witnessed the cruel revenge of Lorenzo, bodies hanging from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria, the smell of blood mixing with the scent of incense. A relative of yours was involved, and your family once again fell into the shadows of suspicion. Following that was war, the devastation of the papal armies on your family's small estates in the south. The only source of income was cut off. And then, the darkest nightmare arrived, the plague. In 1479, Florence became a city of corpses and desperate prayers. Your father sent you to the countryside to flee death, while he remained and nearly did not survive. In those years of wandering, among the olive groves and barren vineyards, you learned to observe the harshness of nature, much like the harshness of politics. You saw the peasants working to exhaustion just to pay taxes to those sitting in magnificent palaces. You saw the fragility of human life before an epidemic or a king's wrong decision. By 1487, when your father's diary ends abruptly, you were no longer a child. You were a young man with sharp eyes and a soul tempered through the red fire of events. Perhaps you went to Rome, working in banks filled with the smell of money and lies. Or perhaps you remained in Florence, quietly observing the gradual decline of the era of Lorenzo. Wherever you were accumulating a formidable baggage, an understanding of the true nature of man. You knew that power does not lie in promises, but in domination. You knew that loyalty is a commodity, and that political alliances change, like the wind. You stood on the boundary between an old world collapsing and a violent new world taking shape. Your fingers brush across the old manuscripts, feeling the roughness of the parchment under the yellow light of the fading candle. You stand up, lightly dusting your worn cloak, and step out into the dark hallway. The sound of your shoes taps a steady rhythm on the cold stone floor as you slowly move toward the large door leading out to the square, where the darkness of the night is beginning to give way to the faint rays of a turbulent dawn. Cold winds from the Apennine Mountains sweep through the Arno Valley, carrying the moisture of spring and the damp smell of a change slowly taking shape in the air. You stand there, thin hands folded into the sleeves of a cloak that has begun to fray, feeling the silent tremor of the ground beneath your feet. Florence, in April 1492, is no longer the Florence of yesterday. The church bells no longer ring peaceful melodies, but seem to be mourning an era that has just closed. Lorenzo the Magnificent has breathed his last, and with his death, the great shadow that shielded this city for decades has vanished into thin air. You see anxious faces on the streets, eyes always searching for a foothold, but finding only vast power vacuums. At the age of 23, you stand among the crowd like a silent ghost, a poor young man with a sharp mind but empty pockets. You ask yourself, where does a person's strength lie if it cannot survive beyond a final breath? While Christopher Columbus's ships are cutting through the waves across the ocean to find a new world, overturning every map mankind has ever known, right here in your homeland, Another map of power is being torn apart. Piero de' Medici, the eldest son of Lorenzo, steps onto the stage with all the arrogance of one born into silk but lacking the steel core of a ruler. You observe Piero. You see the stiffness in his gestures, the clumsiness in his decisions, and above all, a soul empty before the approaching storms. You once tried to write verses praising Giuliano, Piero's younger brother, hoping to find a way out of your family's poverty. But you soon realized that in politics, betting on a collapsing dynasty is a fatal mistake. Your verses now look like ink stains on an old piece of paper, reminding you of the fragility of individual efforts before the gears of fate. The year 1494 arrives, bringing the rhythmic thud of horse hooves and the clanking of iron chains of the French army under the command of King Charles VIII. You stand on the walls of Florence, looking toward the horizon where French spears glisten like a forest of steel thorns under the sun. The weakness of the Italian city-states appears naked before your eyes. Undisciplined mercenary legions, fighting only for money and always ready to flee at the sight of death, are utterly incapable of defending any ideal. Piero panicked. His arrogance melted like wax before the fire of war. You witness him kneeling before the French king, surrendering strategic fortresses without even consulting the Signoria. It was an unforgivable betrayal. You feel the anger of the crowd, boiling like lava ready to erupt. And then it came. Cries of democracy, liberty, echoed through the square as the people swarmed the Medici palace, destroying priceless works of art, tearing down velvet curtains, and expelling the family after 60 years of dominance. A ruler without his own army is in fact merely a borrower of power to decorate his own weakness. You whisper this to yourself as you watch Piero's back as he flees into the night. That power vacuum did not leave peace. Instead, it opened the way for a force even more terrifying than swords: fanatical faith. From the darkness of the San Marco monastery, a voice rises, hoarse but containing a power that can shake weak souls. It is Girolamo Savonarola. You stand tucked behind the stone pillars in the cathedral, watching that Dominican friar stand on the pulpit, his thin hands raised high as if trying to touch the wrath of God. Savonarola calls the French army God's rod, sent down to punish the depravity of Florence. Beneath his feet, the city that was once the heart of the Renaissance suddenly turns back time to the gloomy Middle Ages. You see the works of Botticelli, ancient poetry books, and exquisite musical instruments thrown into the blazing fire in the middle of the square during the bonfires of the vanities. Black smoke rises to cover the sky, carrying the smell of the destruction of knowledge. Why are humans so willing to give up the beauty of reality to seek salvation in vague promises? That question echoes in your mind. You observe Savonarola meticulously, not with the eyes of a follower, but with the eyes of a surgeon dissecting a political entity. You realize that Savonarola is an unarmed prophet. In your later manuscripts, you will write, "It is easy to persuade them of something, but difficult to keep them in that persuasion." Savonarola's power was built on sand. He could control the crowd with the fear of hell, but he had no way to use force to maintain obedience when faith began to crack. Virtue without strength is just a hopeless prayer before the mouth of a cannon. While Florence teetered between extremes, your life sank into a private abyss. Your father was still in debt, and that debt was like an invisible chain holding you back from any public office. In 1496, A cold wind blew through your small house when your mother Bartolomea passed away. You lost your last source of comfort. The room was now only a terrifying silence, where the scent of old parchment mingled with the smell of dying candles. To survive, what did you do? You translated Terence's play Andrea into Tuscan, but you did not merely translate. You infused it with vulgar curses and bitter sarcasm aimed at Savonarola's hypocrisy. It was the resistance of a free soul against the imposition of theocracy. Every word you wrote down was a cut into the fake shell of holiness covering the city. But the real turning point did not come from plays, but from meeting Marcello Virgilio Adriani. In university discussions, Adriani opened a new horizon for you. While Savonarola banned pagan works, Adriani taught you how to use the wisdom of the ancients to defend the Republic. And then, you touched Lucretius. You spent long nights under the yellow light of a candle, copying line by line of De Rerum Natura. You felt the vibration of atoms beneath your pen. You learned about the concept of clinamen, the random chaos of the universe. If the gods do not care about the world, and everything is a random collision of matter, then what are we? You began to realize a terrifying but liberating truth. The world is not governed by the will of God, but by fortuna and the flexible virtue of man. This awakening was an electric shock to your mind. It washed away all the passivity of Christianity, replacing it with an iron will to resist chaos. You were no longer a sleepwalker. You were the one awake in a room full of those who were sleeping. The year 1497 arrived, and the smell of collapse began to spread through the alleys of Florence. The French allies had withdrawn, leaving Savonarola alone before the siege of powers. Pope Alexander VI, an old fox in a cardinal's robe, issued an order of excommunication against the friar. You stand in the crowd, seeing the hesitation beginning to show on faces that once revered Savonarola as a saint. Loyalty is a commodity, and political alliances change, like the wind. You see those who yesterday threw paintings into the fire, today beginning to whisper curses at Savonarola. The Signoria begins to calculate the price of obstinacy. They realize that faith cannot prevent economic and military isolation. You stand there, silently in the eye of the storm, observing the decomposition of a theocratic system. You do not feel triumphant. You only feel a cold curiosity. You see how a prophet is abandoned when his miracles no longer work against the naked reality of power. If Athens can kill Socrates and call it legal, then what does rotted justice ultimately mean? That question repeats in your head as you see Savonarola gradually driven into a corner. You step back, detaching yourself from the crowd that is becoming more aggressive than ever. You feel the chill of the stone wall touching your back, a sense of certainty and reality amidst a world that is disintegrating. You slowly turn, hands tightly clutching the handwritten manuscript of Lucretius hidden in your robe like a secret weapon. Your shoes step on broken pottery and the ashes not yet cooled from a recently dyed bonfire of the vanities. You begin to walk, step by step, away from the screams of the square, moving deep into the darkness of the narrow hallways leading toward the Palazzo della Signoria. Your footsteps echo steadily on the blue stones, mingling with the beat of a heart ready to seize the opportunity when the old chapter of history officially closes. Your feet still feel the slight vibration from the blue stone slabs under the road, where the ashes of the bonfires of the vanities have just been swept away by the wind. The acrid smell of burning wood and flesh hangs thick in the air of Florence on this May afternoon in 1498. You stand there, silently watching the Arno River swirl by, carrying the ashes of Girolamo Savonarola toward the distant sea. An unarmed prophet has ended his journey on the gallows and in the flames, leaving behind a bitter lesson about the fragility of faith when it lacks a protective sword. You turn away, leaving the square of Piazza della Signoria filled with whispers behind you. The collapse of a theocratic regime is not just an end, but a liberation. Florence exhales in the chaos, seeking a new breath, a secular order where man is no longer judged by dreams of heaven, but by practical actions on earth. And then, the doors of power unexpectedly swing open before you. A man who was originally marginalized because of his father's debts. On the 19th of June, 1498, you enter the Palazzo della Signoria, not as an observer, but as the second chancellor of the Republic of Florence. You feel the weight of this title as your fingers touch the hot wax seal for the first time. You are a 29-year-old man with no administrative experience, no money to pave your way, but possessing an intellect as sharp as a razor. Why did they choose you? Perhaps because you were clean. You were not involved in Savonarola's theocratic faction, nor did you belong to the network of the Medici family. You are a blank page that the new republic needs to write its cold administrative directives upon. Your job is to handle documents, tax reports, and correspondence with dependent territories. Every day, you sit among towering stacks of files, the scent of old parchment mingling with the pungent smell of India ink, creating an atmosphere of control. Less than a month later, you are given the additional responsibility of secretary to the 10DC di Libertà e Pace. This is the very heart of the storm. You sit in closed meetings, recording every word, every frown of those holding the fate of Florence. You are not the decision maker, but you are the one who sees the entire chessboard. You read intelligence reports, draft orders sent to generals, and gradually realize that power is not a glittering crown. Power is the ability to manipulate information and fear. Your Florence is under siege. The goal of recapturing the port city of Pisa is not just a military ambition. It is the survival of an economy. But what do you see in the armies serving the city? The mercenary commanders, condottieri, appear before you like lurking vultures. During inspection trips to the military camps at Pontedera, you smell the scent of treachery. You look at the mercenary commanders, men wearing magnificent armor, but whose hearts beat only for Florence. They do not fight for you. They do not sacrifice for you. They only wait for the moment to betray you. A dead mercenary cannot collect his pay. That phrase repeats in your head as you see Paolo Vitelli, the commander whom Florence trusted with its entire treasury, intentionally delaying the capture of Pisa. Vitelli's betrayal is a knife in the back of the Republic. When he is arrested and executed in October 1499, you stand there, witnessing his death with a terrifying calmness. You do not feel pity. You only see a confirmation of your theory. A nation that entrusts its life to mercenaries is like a man building a house on water. The first diplomatic mission to meet Countess Caterina Sforza at Imola taught you another lesson. You stand before the Tigress of Forli, an iron woman with eyes that can see through your clumsy diplomatic schemes. You struggle to use words to draw her to Florence's side, but you receive only sarcasm. The words of an envoy without an army behind him are as light as a feather in the wind. You leave empty-handed, but carrying a naked truth. In politics, politeness is merely a decorative shell for military power. But the pinnacle of enlightenment comes from a more distant land, France. In July 1500, you and your associate, Francesco della Casa, travel to the court of King Louis XII. This trip does not carry the vibrant colors of festivals, but the taste of humiliation. You stand in the middle of the magnificent palace of Amboise, where the hand-woven tapestries and towering stone walls seem to want to crush the self-esteem of a lowly secretary from Florence. You must wait for weeks just to catch a glimpse of the king's robe. The French nobles look at you with contempt, calling you by demeaning titles. You have no money to bribe, no gifts to offer, and most importantly, you do not represent a power that can threaten them. Weakness is an unforgivable sin in the eyes of the strong. You whisper this to yourself as you stand before Cardinal Georges d'Amboise. When that powerful prime minister says that Italians understand nothing of war, you strike back with sharpness. And you French understand nothing of politics, because if you did, you would not have let the church become so strong. 6 months in France is a course in the reality of ultimate power. You see a unified France, where every will converges on one point, the king. You see the difference between a nation that possesses one's own arms, arme proprie, and the Italian city-states that must always borrow the arms of others, arme d'altri. You realize that loyalty between nations is just an illusion nurtured by interest. During the long nights in France, under the flickering light of a candle, you write reports to send back to Florence. You skip the empty flattery. You go straight into dissecting the military structure and psychology of the opponent. You realize an effectual truth. There is such a gap between how one lives and how one should live that he who neglects what is being done for what should be done will learn his destruction rather than his preservation. When you return to Florence in early 1501, you are no longer the secretary dreaming of ancient republican theories. You carry within you the chill of realpolitik. But fate does not give you rest. The rebellion at Pistoia calls. That vassal city is drowning in blood due to purges between factions. You are sent there not to negotiate, but to restore order. 3 trips to Pistoia, witnessing the brutality of man against man, have distilled in you a cold principle of governance. A leader must never be allowed to choose the path of half-hearted compromise. Should one be cruel or merciful? That question rings out as you stand among the corpses on the streets of Pistoia. The answer appears clearly in your mind. A ruler has only 2 choices: either appease them with absolute mercy or crush them with such horrific violence that they can never take revenge. Hesitation between these 2 extremes is the seed of collapse. You used decisiveness to restore peace to Pistoia, and that was when you understood that sometimes cruelty in the present is the greatest mercy for the future. Amidst those storms of power, there is a peaceful harbor you find, Marietta Corsini. In August 1501, you marry a young, beautiful girl from a prestigious family. The wedding takes place in simplicity, but contains a promise of stability. You touch Marietta's soft hand, feeling the complete contrast to the roughness of swords and the coldness of diplomatic petitions. Marietta does not understand politics. She does not know of the treachery of mercenaries or the arrogance of the French king. But she brings you a family, an estate you can return to after long trips. She bears you children, caring for the house with silent devotion. Though you may later wander into extramarital affairs, Marietta remains the only thread keeping you tied to human reality before you are completely swept away into the world of political demons. Can domestic happiness compensate for the bitterness of power? You ask yourself this in the nights lying beside Marietta, listening to her steady breathing, while your mind still hovers among the intrigues of Cesare Borgia, a name beginning to appear like a ghost, threatening all of Italy. You quietly leave the bed, careful not to wake Marietta. Your bare feet touch the cool wooden floor, bringing instant alertness. You move toward the desk, where the manuscript on the citizen militia lies waiting. You pick up the quill pen, dipping it lightly into the thick black ink, feeling the connection between thought and the words that begin to flow. Faint moonlight shines through the window, illuminating the path leading out of the estate. You put on your dark cloak, silently open the door, and step out onto the porch. The sound of insects chirping in the grass mingles with the wind whistling through the olive trees as you begin to stride toward the road leading to the barracks, where the cards of fate wait to be flipped in the upcoming confrontation with the tyrant of Romagna. The wind whistling through the olive trees, faint under the moonlight, is gradually replaced by the crunch of carriage wheels on the dusty dirt road leading toward Romagna. You sit in the rustic carriage, feeling every jolt of the road, the scent of old leather, and the pungent smell of horse sweat mingling with the cold mist of northern Italy. You are Niccolò Machiavelli, and your heart beats to a strange rhythm, a curiosity mixed with deep unease as the shadow of a monster, or perhaps a savior, looms over the entire peninsula. The Italian peninsula at this time is like a torn jigsaw puzzle. Milan, Venice, Rome, Naples. Each city-state is a chess piece, tearing at one another on a board full of blood and tears. Political alliances change as fast as the wind, and the survival of a nation sometimes lies in the pockets of treacherous mercenary commanders, condottieri. Amidst this lawless chaos, the name Cesare Borgia rings out like a thunderclap. The illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI is using the power of the Holy See and the sword of the French to build a brutal personal empire. Your Florence, though radiant under the light of art and finance, is trembling like a leaf before the storm. The Republic's army is but a collection of greedy, undisciplined men who will turn and flee as soon as they smell death. In 1502, when Piero Soderini was elected leader for life to seek stability, you, at the age of 33, were given an impossible task: to go on a mission to face the fox and the lion, Cesare Borgia. The shadows of the Urbino Palace welcome you on a June afternoon in 1502. Long marble hallways, where dancing torchlight creates grotesque shapes on the walls. You walk, the rhythmic tap of your shoes steady on the cold stone floor, leading you before a man with eyes as cold as ice and the aura of a god. Cesare Borgia sits there, splendid and magnificent. He does not hesitate to use direct threats to extort Florence, demanding the restoration of power to the Medici family. He flaunts his military strength as a way to crush your will. But instead of feeling disgusted, you find yourself fascinated. You see in Borgia something that Florence completely lacks: an iron will and extraordinary leadership ability. In secret reports sent home, You wrote with undisguised admiration that he knows neither danger or fatigue. Why does the virtue of a saint often lead to the destruction of a state, while the cruelty of a tyrant brings order? That question begins to gnaw at your mind as you witness what happened at Imola later that year. Borgia's mercenary generals, led by the Vitelli brothers, betrayed him. An ordinary man would have panicked, but not Borgia. He maintained a terrifyingly calm face, inviting the rebels to the town of Senigallia for peace negotiations. The night of the 31st of December 1502. A thick mist envelops Senigallia, hiding the darkest of schemes. You stand at a distance, watching the rebels walk into the trap with a ridiculous innocence. And then, in the darkness of closed rooms, Borgia ordered them all strangled in a single night. No trial, no mercy, only cold decisiveness to protect power. This massacre was an electric shock to the world, but to you, it was a supreme political lesson. You realized that violence, if used decisively, at the right time, and serving a specific goal, is actually the most effective tool for establishing order. It is like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting away the rotting flesh to save the whole body. Think of Ramiro de Orco. Borgia used this ruthless commander to pacify Romagna with the most horrific measures. And when order was restored, when the people began to resent the cruelty, what did Borgia do? He had Ramiro's body cut in half and displayed in the square. A perfect trick. He achieved his goal of security while winning over the people by shifting all the blame onto his henchmen. Should a prince be loved or feared? The answer appears clearly in the light of those massacres. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. Love is a loose bond held together by interest, which breaks as soon as men feel threatened. But fear is reliable, and love is not. It is a weight that never lets go. But alas, even the most powerful cannot escape the hand of Fortuna. In August 1503, the sudden death of Pope Alexander VI collapsed the entire foundation of the Borgia power. You saw Cesare Borgia, who was once the embodiment of strength, now lying flat on a sickbed, hovering between life and death. You were sent to Rome to observe the conclave electing the new pope. There, you witnessed the fatal mistake of a genius. Borgia threw his support behind his archenemy, Giuliano della Rovere, who then ascended the throne as Julius II. Borgia believed in a promise. How ridiculous that innocence was. As soon as he grasped the crown, Julius II betrayed and imprisoned Borgia. The once glorious army disintegrated like smoke, and the tyrant of Romagna ended his life in an obscure skirmish in Spain. Standing amidst the ruins of the Borgia Empire, you did not see a failure of violence, but a failure of strategy. Borgia had possessed one's own arms. He had known how to use cruelty to rule, but he had forgotten to establish a foundational system strong enough to survive without his papal father. He had forgotten the clinamen of the atoms of fate. The experience of observing the rise and fall of Borgia from 1502 to 1504 directly molded the core theories in your book The Prince later on. You realized a naked truth. Traditional morality is often a fatal weakness on the political chessboard. A prince who wants to maintain power must absolutely not rely on the arms of others or the mercy of fate. A leader must equip himself with his own army, know how to use cruelty as a surgical tool, and build solid laws. This world is not for sleepwalkers. It is for those who dare to look straight into the darkness to find the light of stability. You feel a current of electricity running down your spine. As these ideas begin to crystallize into cold lines of text in your mind, you fold the final diplomatic report, feeling the roughness of the parchment and the weight of the secrets you hold. The footsteps of the guards outside the Rome hallway fade away, giving way to the silence of the somber night. You stand up, lightly blowing out the candle, leaving the room enveloped in darkness, then quietly step toward the window. The chill of the Roman night brushes against your face, carrying the smell of road dust and the faint scent of jasmine from the gardens below. You put your cloak back on, tighten your belt, and walk down the narrow stone stairs, where your horse is waiting in quiet patience, ready for the journey back to Florence, where you will begin to turn your observations of tyrants into a plan to build an army for your own city. The chill of the Roman morning frost still clings to the hem of your cloak as you spur your horse back toward Florence, feeling the weight of new ideas crystallizing in your chest. The sound of horse hooves beats a steady rhythm on the Cassia Trail, as rhythmic as the heartbeat of one who has just found the truth amidst the ruins of illusions. You look toward the horizon, where the Tuscan hills begin to appear in the dim light of dawn, and you know that your Florence cannot continue to survive through the pity of others. The year 1505. Florence is once again brought to its knees by humiliation at the gates of Pisa. You stand in the meeting room of the Great Council, listening to reports of Piero Soderini's shameful retreat. A campaign that started with great promise has vanished into smoke simply because of the division among the mercenary commanders. You see the aging faces of the Florentine elite, pale with anger, as the city treasury sits empty, yet they still do not stop arguing about which mercenary army to hire next. Why do we entrust the soul of freedom into the hands of those who know only gold? That question rings in your head like a warning bell. You see the mercenary commanders appear like greedy ghosts. They were expensive, unreliable, and dangerous. You have seen with your own eyes how they avoid real battles, because dead mercenaries don't collect payment. They are fragile glass toys, shiny on the outside, but shattered as soon as they touch the cold steel of reality. Florence is dying in the false protection of strangers. And you, a thin secretary with deep-set eyes, have decided to step out from the shadows of the files to offer a proposal so bold it seems insane, to establish an army of the citizens themselves. You stand before Soderini feeling a slight tremor in your fingertips, but your voice is as firm as the strike of a blacksmith's hammer. You argue that men fighting for their own city would be more reliable than hired foreigners fighting for money. You see the terror in the eyes of the nobility. They fear the peasants holding spears as much as they fear the external enemy. They fear that once the people have weapons, the old order will be overturned. But in a moment of desperation, Soderini nods. And that is when your true journey begins. You leave the velvet hallways of the Palazzo della Signoria for the scent of damp earth, the smell of sweat, and the pungent flavor of Casentino wine. You travel through the Tuscan countryside, from lush valleys to windswept hilltops. You are no longer holding a quill, but a recruitment list. You look into the eyes of young farmers, aged 17 to 40. You see in their eyes not greed, but a sense of wonder mixed with a budding pride. You personally organize them into units, teaching them how to keep rank, how to use long pikes to form a wall of steel. You deliberately stay away from urban areas filled with political intrigue, seeking the pure souls of the land. You turn hands once used only for the plow into hands that grip the sword hilt firmly. The 15th of February, 1506. A cold winter morning, but with bright sun over the square of Florence. You stand on a high platform, heart thumping as you watch the first 400 militia recruits parade through the streets. They wear simple but neat uniforms, iron armor glistening under the sun, spears standing upright like a forest in the middle of the city. Their footsteps echo steadily on the blue stones. Thud, thud, thud. Those are not the steps of mercenaries, but the steps of men protecting their own home. The final confirmation comes on the 6th of December, 1506, when the ordinance of the Florentine militia, drafted by your own hand, is passed. You become the soul of this 10,000-man force. You are not just a philosopher, you have become an architect of power. But fate always knows how to test your patience. While the militia project is reaching maturity, you must once again don your diplomatic cloak to travel to the court of Emperor Maximilian I. From December 1507 to June 1508, you toil across the snow-covered passes of the Alps to reach Bolzano. There, you see a strange juxtaposition. Maximilian I, who holds the title of Holy Roman Emperor, appears like a great ship leaking water. He is indecisive, too dependent on unreliable advisors, and the treasury is pathetically empty. You see the chaos beneath the empire's glitzy exterior. You realize that, whether an emperor or a small city-state, without an autonomous military foundation and substantial control, all is but a vain dream. This mission brings no money to Florence, but it brings you a belief firmer than ever in the militia you are building. July 1508. The harsh sun of the Tuscan summer bakes the fields, and it is the time you decide to play the decisive card against Pisa. You no longer sit in an office. You are present at the camps, your hair darkened by sun and road dust. Since there is no officially trusted commander, you personally lead the militia units in sweeping tactics. You understand that to defeat a fortified city, one needs more than just swords. One needs to break their will to live. You order the militia to destroy all crops and cut off supply routes from the sea. The smell of scorched wheat and smoke from granaries spreads across the Pisan countryside. It is a necessary cruelty. You watch your peasant soldiers carry out orders with discipline, without any resistance or demands for money like the mercenaries of years past. By the end of 1508, Pisa had become an island of hunger. You move constantly between outposts, checking every cannon, ensuring every bag of ammunition is ready. You feel the weight of responsibility as 4,000 militia soldiers look to you as a guide. Under the command of General Antonio Giacomini, the cannons begin to roar, shaking the ancient walls of Pisa. And then, the moment of triumph arrives. The 8th of June, 1509. Church bells in Florence echo through the Arno Valley, announcing the victory they have waited 15 years for. You lead the militia into the gates of Pisa on horseback. The gaunt people of Pisa look at you with fear and subjection, but you only feel a strange serenity. Citizen soldiers fighting for Florence rather than for gold finally broke Pisa's resistance. Your philosophy has been proven. Republics could be militarily effective if they organized properly. You stand in the square of Pisa, feeling the sea breeze blow through, carrying the scent of victory and conviction. This success brings your name to its peak. You become the right hand of Soderini, the silent hero of Florence. You begin building an artillery department, inspecting Tuscan fortresses, reinforcing every brick and every defensive gap. You believe you have created an impenetrable armor for the Republic. But alas, on the chessboard of the great powers, Florence is still only a small pawn. In 1510, a gloomy atmosphere looms again as the relationship between King Louis XII of France and Pope Julius II begins to crack. You see the black clouds of war rolling in from the north. Loyalty is a commodity, and political alliances change like the wind. You understand that the victory at Pisa was only a short lull before the greatest storm of your life. You must pack your bags again, preparing for a desperate mission to France to prevent a massive bloodshed that your militia might not be able to withstand. You lightly stroke your sword scabbard, feeling the roughness of the leather that has followed you across many miles of war. The murmurs of the militia soldiers by the campfire fade, giving way to the sigh of the night falling over the Tuscan fields. You slowly stand up, dusting the cloak, and walk toward the carriage, waiting in the dark. The militia soldiers raise their spears to salute you as you pass, the flickering firelight illuminating faces full of trust. You step into the carriage, sit in the dark corner, and signal the driver to start. The sound of wheels rolling steadily on the stone road carries you away from the peace of victory toward the French border, where the intrigues of monarchs wait to test the will of a philosopher who has just tasted the sweetness of true power. Your fingers tighten around the latest diplomatic reports, feeling the biting cold of the newly dried ink and the roughness of the parchment on a late afternoon in Florence in 1511. The bells from the Palazzo Vecchio ring out, but they no longer bring the sense of pride they did on the day you returned triumphant from Pisa. That sound is now heavy, like the knocking of a cruel fate, gradually manifesting through the Tuscan mountains. The Italian peninsula at this time is nothing less than a precious piece of silk being torn apart by the hands of giants. You look up at the map hanging in your office, where the boundaries between Milan, Venice, and Rome are being blurred by bloodstains and the hoofprints of foreign powers. A world you long hoped would unite under a republican ideal is instead becoming a springboard for the grand schemes of northern kings. The false peace of Florence begins to crack when King Louis XII of France decides to make a reckless move. The king wants to summon a council to depose Pope Julius II, and unfortunately, he chooses Pisa as the meeting place. You stood in the dark hallways of the French court, trying to use all the sharpness of your words to dissuade him, but the voice of a small Florentine envoy was buried by the arrogance of a monarch. You felt the breath of the storm upon your return, and as expected, the warrior Pope Julius II did not remain idle. The 5th of October, 1511. The Holy League is born like a multi-headed monster, gathering the strength of the papacy, Spain, and Venice. Their goal is clear: to sweep the French out of Italy. And your Florence, for having been involved in the French King's Council at Pisa, suddenly becomes the target of that sacred wrath. You look at Piero Soderini, the gonfalonier you always trusted, sitting there with a face full of kindness but lacking in decisiveness. Soderini chooses loyalty to France, a choice based on old treaties and a blind faith in political morality. You have questioned yourself many times. Is honesty in politics a form of stupidity when your opponents are old foxes who know no rules? You try to persuade him to join the Holy League, or at least to abandon passive neutrality, but Soderini only remained silent. That silence was more terrifying than cannon fire, for it was the silence of an unarmed prophet waiting to be crushed. You throw yourself into work to dispel the fear. In September 1511, you ride along the valleys, recruiting 500 more cavalry for the militia. You feel the pulse of military preparation, the vibration of horse hooves, and the clashing of iron armor. But deep in your heart, you know that 500 or 1,000 men cannot stop the Spanish tercio infantry, the most professional killing machines in the world. April 1512 brings a flicker of false hope from the Battle of Ravenna. News of the French victory makes the people of Florence cheer and dance in the squares. You stand in the crowd, seeing Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici taken alive, and you also have the moment of believing that the Medici family would forever remain ghosts of the past. But alas, loyalty is a commodity, and political alliances change like the wind. The victory at Ravenna exhausted the French. In just 3 months, they fled Italy like birds frightened by a great storm, leaving Florence exposed, alone, and trembling before the cannons of the Holy League. And then, the true shadow arrived in August 1512. You stand on the walls of Florence, looking toward Prato, where black smoke begins to rise, obscuring the sky. The powerful Spanish army is approaching, bringing with them the brutality of mercenaries and the wounded pride of the Medici family. 18 years of exile have turned them into hungry wolves. This is the moment of truth for your brainchild, the militia. The 5,000 peasants you taught to hold pikes and keep rank now face naked reality. You feel a chill run down your spine as you hear news of Prato. It was not a battle, it was an execution. Your peasants, who could win in small sieges, disintegrated like sea foam before the iron discipline and cruelty of the Spanish. The screams from Prato echo all the way to Florence. You smell blood and ash in the wind. The Spanish swarm into the town, not just to win, but to spread absolute terror. They massacre brutally, looting every house, leaving a bloody message. Look at Prato and know the future of Florence. This tragedy chokes your heart, but it also confirms an effectual truth you have long pondered. Mere patriotism is never enough without coercive power and professional cruelty. You realize that the world does not operate based on what men ought to do, but on the naked reality of what men do. Morality is a beautiful cloak, but it cannot stop a cold, sharp blade. Florence collapses as quickly as a sandcastle. Soderini, who was once appointed to rule for life, now flees in the darkness of the night into exile. You see the helplessness of a good man in an era of evil men. What happens if virtue, in the traditional sense, is actually a weakness? The answer lies at the gates of Florence on the 1st of September 1512. Giuliano de' Medici and Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici enter the city as victors. You stand tucked away in the shadows of an alley, seeing those who yesterday cheered for the Republic, today kneeling to welcome the new dictators. The entire system you dedicated 14 years of your youth to building, the councils, the democratic committees, is wiped out in a single breath. The Free Republic has died under the boots of a foreign army. But your personal tragedy has only just begun. You, a devoted civil servant who always considered yourself a man of the state rather than a faction, tried to cling to hope. You took up your pen, writing praises of the Medici family in a clumsy tone, trying to prove your competence. But in politics, loyalty is a debt that cannot be paid with talent. To the Medici, You are a dangerous man, a relic of the old regime that must be eliminated. The 7th of November, 1512. You stand before the door of your office for the last time. A cold notice is issued. You are dismissed from all positions. Your salary is cut off. Your illustrious diplomatic missions are now only fading memories. You are banned from setting foot into the Palazzo Vecchio, which was once your second home through thousands of working hours. You feel the terrifying silence of the room. The smell of ink and parchment now carries the bitter taste of betrayal. At age 43, from the heights of diplomatic power, you have suddenly become an invisible man, an unemployed man rejected by his own homeland. The exile order forces you to leave Florence, back to your small estate at Sant'Andrea in Percasina. Florence now appears behind you like a broken dream. You walk on the road, leading out of the city, feeling the weight of failure heavy on your shoulders. But in this very darkness of exile, another fire begins to kindle. The malignity of the times has stripped you of your right to act, but it cannot strip you of your right to reflect. This world is a cave, and you have just been pushed out into the blinding sunlight of the naked truth. You are no longer a practitioner of politics. You are about to become the one who redefines it. The prince is beginning to take shape from the very wounds and humiliation you carry with you. You stop by a rough stone milestone, your hand stroking the damp green moss, while your eyes still follow the final rays of the sunset, fading behind the distant bells of Florence. You lean down, picking up a handful of dry suburban earth, feeling its roughness crunching between your fingers like the way fate is crushing your old ideals. The sound of the carriage wheels carrying your meager belongings echoes steadily on the muddy dirt road, creating deep ruts under the drizzling rain that begins to cloud the path. You say nothing, only silently walking behind the carriage, your feet stepping into murky puddles as the darkness of the woods surrounding the Sant'Andrea estate gradually swallows your thin figure into its heart, preparing for long, sleepless nights over a blank page. The darkness enveloping the road leading to Sant'Andrea in Percasina is no longer an escape, but a cage without bars. You walk, your feet stepping into the winter slush of 1512, feeling the numbness of the cold seeping through your thin cloak. Florence, the city you dedicated 14 years of your youth to serving, now appears on the horizon like a kingdom of strangers. The distant church bells no longer ring with the melodies of freedom, but with the death knell for the republic you always believed in. You stand there, in your family's old weathered house, breathing in the scent of rotting wood and dust. Everything changed overnight. On the 7th of November 1512, the cold dismissal order stripped you of everything: honor, salary, and the right to enter the palace of the city. You ask yourself, what is the meaning of loyalty when it is only met with abandonment? Or is it that in politics, the most loyal man is the most dangerous to new masters? But the real tragedy only began on a gray morning in February 1513. Heavy banging on the door shakes the stillness of the house. You are dragged away in shock, your hands tightened by cold iron chains. Your name appeared on a conspiracy list, a cruel piece of paper you had never even touched. The door of the Bargello prison closes behind you with a dry screech, locking you into a world of darkness, musty smells, and the terrifying silence of death. For the next 3 weeks, time is no longer measured in hours, but in pain. You stand before the strappato. The jailers tie your hands behind your back. attach them to a rope, and hoist you high into the air. You feel your entire body weight concentrated in your shoulder joints, and then they let go. You fall freely. Snap. The pain tears through your flesh as your shoulders fly out of their sockets. 6 times in a row they repeat this. 6 times you hang between life and death. Are you conspiring? Are you betraying the Medici? Your only answer is a steadfast silence, a silence forged from steel. You realize that the body can be crushed, but the effectual truth of your innocence is the only thing they cannot take away. If a person can endure the ultimate cruelty of man without breaking, does their soul become immortal? And then a miracle comes from an unexpected place. Pope Julius II dies, and Giovanni de' Medici ascends the papal throne as Leo X. Florence celebrates, and a general amnesty brings you out of the Bargello grave in March 1513. You step out into the sunlight, your shoulders still aching, your breath still carrying the smell of the dungeon, but your intellect has become colder and sharper than ever. You realize that Fortuna is one of those violent rivers, and if you do not know how to build dikes, it will wash everything away. You retreat to Sant'Andrea and Percasina. Your life is now split into 2 suffocatingly opposite halves. By day, you wear clothes stained with mud and olive oil. You wake when the mist still covers the vineyards, overseeing the cutting of wood, arguing with woodcutters over a few small coins. You sit in the local inn, surrounded by bakers, butchers, and cheap gamblers. You play cards, curse, and let yourself sink into the mediocrity of manual life. Why does a man who once negotiated with the King of France now have to fight for a card game with illiterate men? This is how you escape the pain of being forgotten. But when night falls, a sacred ritual begins. You return home, standing at the threshold of your study. Here, you perform a deeply symbolic act. You strip off your dusty and mud-stained work clothes. You wash yourself clean and put on the elegant robes of an ambassador, the clothes you wore when standing before monarchs. Decently dressed, I enter the ancient courts of rulers who have long since died. In the room where only the flickering candlelight remains, the ghosts of the past begin to appear. Cicero, Livy, Aristotle. I am not ashamed to talk to them and ask them to explain their actions, and they, out of kindness, answer me. 4 hours passed. S and I feel no worry. I forget all my troubles. I no longer fear poverty or dread death. I live entirely through them. It was during those sleepless nights that The Prince was written. It is not a book of hollow morality. It is a scream of reality. You decide to cast off all illusions of imaginary republics and principalities to seek the effectual truth. You write with all your bitterness and blood-soaked experience. You realize humans are basically selfish, ungrateful, and self-serving. You conclude that there is such a gap between how one lives and how one should live, that he who neglects what is being done for what should be done will learn his destruction rather than his preservation. You build the model of the prince based on this lord, who is splendid and magnificent, whom you once witnessed. You teach them to learn how not to be good. You tell them, a ruler must be the fox to avoid the snares, and a lion to overwhelm the wolves. And then, the most shocking question in political history appears under your pen. Should one be loved or feared? You argue that love is a cheap commodity, easily torn away when personal interest is threatened, but fear is maintained by punishment, something that is always present and never lets go. Therefore, it would be best to be both loved and feared. But since the two rarely come together, anyone compelled to choose will find greater security in being feared than in being loved. You look at the page, where the painful black lines appear like scars on skin. You know you are breaking the chains of thousands of years of Christian philosophy. You are teaching men how to look straight at the demon within them to maintain order. But deep down, you are still a lover of freedom. Alongside the prince, you begin to sketch discourses on Livy. You ask yourself, can a tyrant bring peace, or can only a free republic bring lasting greatness? That question tears at you during the long nights at Sant'Andrea. You hope this book will be the ticket to bring you back to Florence. You intend to dedicate it to Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici, the grandson of Lorenzo the Magnificent. You imagine him opening the book, marveling at your wisdom and summoning you back. But reality is another slap from fate. Lorenzo prefers his new pack of hunting dogs to the dark political philosophies of a fallen man. The book is ignored, and you remain imprisoned in the stillness of the countryside. You feel an overwhelming sense of helplessness as you watch the candle slowly die on your desk. The scent of burning wax mingles with the smell of old parchment, creating a flavor of nostalgia and sorrow. You are no longer a powerful envoy. You are just a 4-5-year-old man with scars on your shoulders and a treasure trove of knowledge that the world is not yet ready to receive. You slowly stand up, the ache from your tortured shoulder joints rising again in the late-night cold. You take off your ambassador's robes, hanging them on the rack as carefully as if you were preserving a fading dream. You put on your old wool cloak again, your bare feet touching the cool stone floor as you walk toward the window. Pale moonlight shines down on the silver-white olive rose, creating long shadows on the ground. You open the door, step onto the porch, letting the night mist brush against your tired face. The chirping of crickets in the grass mingles with the wind whistling through the trees, leading your mind away from power schemes to find a fragile peace in the darkness of Tuscany. You begin to walk, step by step, toward the edge of the forest, where the shadows of ancient cypress trees wait to embrace the loneliness of a rejected genius. The scent of laurel mingles with pure jasmine in the still air of twilight. The sound of gravel crunching beneath your feet as you walk slowly on the small path deep into the Orti Oricellari garden. You are Niccolò Machiavelli, and after the years buried in the mud of exile and the darkness of the dungeon, you have found for yourself a new sanctuary. A place where power is measured not by swords, but by the strength of ideas. The year 1516. You stand under the shade of ancient trees planted in the ancient Greek style, feeling the cool breeze blowing in from the Arno River. The book, The Prince, that you poured your heart into writing now, likely lies gathering dust in the Medici library, ignored in favor of a pack of hunting dogs. You let out a slight smile, a smile touched with self-mockery and bitterness. Loyalty is a commodity, and political alliances change like the wind. You have sworn never to dedicate your intellect to those who do not know how to appreciate it again. At Orti Oricellari, you are no longer a fallen exile. You are a master. You sit among the elite intellectuals of Florence, people like Cosimo Russelli or Zanobi Buondelmonte, young souls yearning to rediscover the glory of ancient times. In the secret space after elegant dinners, as the moonlight shines down on the stark white marble statues, You dissect the corruption of current society with them. You wonder, why can a nation once as great as Rome become as weak and cowardly as the Italians of today? That question is not only for them, but for your own restless soul. You realize that Florence is disintegrating because people have forgotten the blood-soaked lessons of history. You begin to write discourses on Livy not to please a prince, but to dedicate it to your true friends, those who deserve to be rulers even if they do not hold a throne. Different from the cruelty and solitude in The Prince, this time you find faith in the crowd. You sit at your desk, under the flickering yellow light of a candle, writing down revolutionary lines. A people is more prudent, more stable, and of better judgment than a prince. You look to Rome's past, where strength lay not in a brilliant individual, but in the superb balance of a mixed constitution. You see the consuls bringing strength, the Senate bringing wisdom, and the tribunes bringing oversight from the masses. You realize that class conflict was not a disease, but a constructive force. What happens if the struggle between the rich and the poor is actually the medicine that protects freedom? That is an effectual truth that you want to awaken in the hearts of the sleepwalking Florentines. But you also do not forget the coldness of reality. You criticize Christianity for teaching humans excessive humility, making them weak and effeminate before evil men. You believe that religion must be a tool for training discipline and courage, much like how the Romans used the gods to build their army. When your pen grows weary of dry philosophies, you seek liberation in satirical laughter. You write Mandragola in the years around 1518. You stand in the wings of the theater stage, hearing the hearty laughter of the audience as they witness the triumph of cunning astucia over virtue. The play tells of a fake doctor and a potion made from mandrake root, but deeper down you are painting the picture of a deceived Florence. Lucrezia, the beautiful but infertile woman, is the metaphor for your home city enduring a hopeless marriage with the Medici. You realize that when virtue has been corrupted, then deception becomes the tool of salvation. Earthly woes exceed hellish ones. That phrase echoes in your mind as you write about the demon Belphegor, who must flee the earth because he cannot endure the terribleness of a wife. You laugh, but your heart still turns toward the battlefield. In 1521, the book The Art of War was born, the only work you see published during your lifetime. You borrow the words of Fabrizio Colonna in the Orti Orsolari garden to repeat the greatest obsession of your life, the militia. You write about the lack of discipline of mercenaries, about how they betray the nation for a few florins. You long to see the young Tuscan peasants holding long pikes again, standing firm like walls of steel to shield the palace of freedom. You compare military strength to the roof of a castle. If the roof is rotten, every work of art inside will be ruined. You still believe that only one's own arms can save the fate of Italy. And then, Fortuna turns again. Lorenzo de' Medici dies, and Cardinal Giulio de' Medici ascends to power. A narrow door opens again. Giulio wants to bridge the gap with the Republican faction, and you, the man, once tortured by this very family, are invited to be an advisor. You draft a proposal for constitutional reform in 1520 with startling boldness. You advise the Pope to re-establish the Great Council, returning power to the people. You stand on the boundary of a steadfast Republican and a practical official. Is it possible to use the very hand of a dictator to rebuild freedom? That question torments you in every page of the life of Castruccio Castracani. You turn a military leader from Lucca into a model of an ideal ruler, attributing to him sharp sayings to convey your own message. The greatest achievement comes in 1525, when Giulio, now Pope Clement VII, commissions you to write Florentine histories. You sit among massive archives, the smell of old paper dust surrounding you like the spirits of the past. You do not write to praise, you write to warn. You recount the collapse of the Roman Empire, the bloody division between the Guelphs and Ghibellines. You point out that Florence is dying because of factionalism. Unlike Rome, where conflict created laws, in Florence, conflict only creates decay. You bring 8 manuscript volumes to Rome, present them to the Pope, receive your payment, but still find your heart empty. You are still an outsider, a great observer without the power to act. It exists wherever someone stops and asks why, wherever someone refuses to sleepwalk, wherever someone values truth more than comfort. Those tributes to Socrates repeat in your head as you look back at the 10-year journey of being absent from politics but brilliant in literature. You fold the final manuscript of Florentine histories, feeling the roughness of the leather cover and the heaviness of the truths you have exposed. The candle in your study is now only a tiny flickering spot of light before the night winds blowing through the cracks of the door. You stand up, stretching your back to dispel the fatigue accumulated after hours of bending over the writing table. Your feet walk out of the room, moving toward the balcony, looking down at the Orti Orsolari garden, which is now completely submerged in the darkness of the night. The sound of insects chirping in the laurel bushes mingles with the rustle of leaves, creating a silent melody of nothingness. You slowly walk down the stone stairs, your hands tracing the cool wall to feel the certainty of reality, then leisurely move toward the main gate, where the silhouette of Florence, with its hazy bell towers, awaits your return after a long night immersed in the ghosts of history. The pungent smell of mortar mingled with the gray stone dust blows into your face, making your throat dry in the parched sun of the Florentine spring in 1526. The steady sound of the stonemason's chisels rings out, beating against your mind like alarm bells for a dying era. You are Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who spent a lifetime building fortresses of thought, now using the thin hands of a secretary to check the thickness of actual city walls. The Italian peninsula at this time is like a rotting wooden boat in a great storm between two giants. King Francis I of France has just been released after his humiliating defeat at Pavia, and immediately, the king threw his peace treaty with Emperor Charles V into the fire. You let out a slight smile when you hear this news. From diplomatic reports, men judge by the eye rather than by the hand. You understand that in politics, a promise is but a fragile layer of wax before the fire of self-interest. Francis I has gone back on his word, and Charles V, the one who holds the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, is seething with rage. The specter of Spanish and German infantry legions is looming toward the south, and your Florence lies right in the path of death. The 22nd of May 1526. The League of Cognac was formed as a final effort by Pope Clement VII to save Italy from the Emperor's boot. And for you, this chaos is the door that has just creaked open after more than 10 years of being cast out. You have worn yourself out offering books, writing histories, and enduring the humiliation of being forgotten. Now, the Medici need you. Not because they love you, but because they fear destruction. There is a tragic paradox in your fate. He's always in the wrong place, at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing. You are put back into service exactly when the Medici's power is standing on the edge of an abyss. But a passionate patriot like you has no time to resent Fortuna. You plunge into work with all the eagerness of one who has just been handed back his sword after many years of deprivation. You walk along the ancient city walls of Florence, your feet stepping on stones that have existed since the Middle Ages. You realize a naked truth. These fortresses are completely useless against the destructive power of modern artillery. They are too high, too thin, and too weak. You sit under candlelight, sketching star-shaped forts, proposing to lower the height but increase the thickness of the walls to withstand the weight of cannonballs. In your mind, these bricks and layers of mortar are the embodiment of the military philosophy you wrote in The Art of War. The strength of a nation lies not in hiring treacherous mercenary armies, but in the ability to defend itself with a solid foundation. You understand that there is such a gap between how one lives and how one should live, that he who neglects what is being done for what should be done will learn his destruction rather than his preservation. In April 1526, you were summoned to Rome. You stand in the magnificent hallways of the Vatican before the Pope you once called a friend. Clement VII looks at you no longer as a conspirator, but as a savior. You are given the responsibility of directing and directly supervising the defensive works. Throughout the next 2 months, the once powerful second secretary is now smeared with mud on cluttered construction sites. You urge the stonemasons, calculate costs, handle every bag of lime, every cart of stone. You see yourself like a doctor trying to stitch back the skin of a body that has been wounded too deeply. No job is lowly if it serves the survival of Florence. You have learned how not to be good to do what is necessary for the nation. But Fortuna does not stop there. In July 1526, you must again leave the city walls for the battlefield. You join the army of the League of Cognac, stationed near Milan. You do not hold a sword, but you hold orders and intelligence reports in your hand. You sit on horseback, looking toward the horizon where the emperor's army is arrayed, and feel a surge of contempt in your heart as you look at your commander, Francesco Maria della Rovere. That duke constantly hesitates, wavers, and refuses to launch an attack even when opportunity is within reach. You realize that della Rovere is the embodiment of indecision, a fatal flaw in the art of war. You always praised virtue and boldness, but here you only see the cowardice of mercenaries who only care for their personal safety. One who relies on the arms of others will soon find himself standing over an abyss without support. That delay stripped away the golden opportunity to crush the threat from the start. And then, catastrophic news from Rome arrives in September. The Colonna family, those old foxes allied with the emperor, have suddenly attacked Rome. You stand in the front line camp, feeling the tremor from the rear. Pope Clement VII has to flee in panic into Castel Sant'Angelo. This news is like a knife in the spirit of the League. You realize that the enemy is not only in front of you, but also present right in the heart of the power center. The safety of Florence, the independence of Italy, all are as fragile as a hair before the flame. Amidst those storms, there is a strange irony. 1526 was also the year your play, Mandragola, achieved its greatest success in Rome. You hear stories of how the cardinals and nobles laughed heartily at the cunning schemes on stage. They applauded the victory of deception over virtue, while they themselves were being deceived by fate. The play is a miniature replica of The Prince, where the art of manipulating people is performed as an amusement. You sit by the campfire on the battlefield, breathing in the smell of smoke and damp earth, wondering if those laughing in that theater know that their lives are also just a play reaching its most brutal conclusion. You look at your hands. Hands that once copied the words of ancient greats, were once dislocated by the strappado, and are now rough with mortar and road dust. You are a man nearly 60 years old who has given his last bit of strength to a dynasty about to collapse. You have regained trust, but the price to pay may be the final rejection by the Republican faction. Fortuna is playing the final hand with you. You have tried to control it with your virtue, by building walls, by advising on war, but it seems that the river is too violent to be stopped. You feel a fatigue deep in your marrow, but your eyes still burn with a fire of observation. You cannot stop. A political man is never allowed to fall asleep, even when death is already standing at the threshold. You lightly stroke the worn-edged military map, feeling the roughness of the parchment under fingers calloused by road dust and ink. The sound of the night watch horse hooves echoes steadily outside the tent, mingling with the sighs of soldiers falling into a fitful sleep amidst the battlefield. You stand up, gently pulling back the tent flap to step out into the North Italian night, where the cold mist of the Po Valley begins to envelop everything. Your leather shoes step on the dew-soaked grass, creating soft rustling sounds as you slowly move toward the high sentry post. You look toward Rome, where the fires of intrigue are still burning beneath the pitch-black sky, then silently turn and walk down the hill toward the trail leading back to Florence, where the final bricks of the defensive system await the supervision of a man trying to race against the collapse of an era. The scent of the ashes of half-burnt dreams seems to still linger in the May breeze of Tuscany, carrying the bitter taste of disappointment and the chill of catastrophic news from the south. You stand by the window of your small house in Sant'Andrea, your blurred eyes watching the trail leading back to Florence, where dust particles dance in the evening sun like homeless souls. You are Niccolò Machiavelli, and you feel that the chessboard of power in Italy is being overturned by a giant and cruel hand of fate. The year 1527. The entire world seems to be holding its breath. Pope Clement VII, who bears the Medici blood you spent 15 years trying to serve, is now trapped in a snare of his own making. You see the collapse of a diplomatic genius as he is caught between France and Spain, like a small boat being crushed between two icebergs. Clement VII's strategic mistakes were not just weaknesses, they were an invitation for disaster. And the disaster arrived, bringing with it the roar of 16,000 hungry and fanatical landsknechts. You hear the thundering horse hooves and the clanking of iron chains as they advance through the north. They need no pay. They need no orders. They only need blood and gold. Your Florence was lucky to escape their clutches when this legion changed direction to aim straight for Rome, but the terror remains like a black shadow blotting out the sun. The 6th of May, 1527. The eternal city falls. The sound of cannons exploding in the Roman sky cannot drown out the screams of the brutally massacred citizens. You close your eyes, imagining the German soldiers swarming over the city walls, looting churches, burning down treasures of knowledge. The sack of Rome was not just a military campaign. It was an execution of civilization. Clement VII had to flee for his life in tattered robes, locking himself in Castel Sant'Angelo, helplessly watching his capital being turned into hell. If the supreme power of the Holy See can also shatter like a piece of pottery, then what in this world is solid? That question rings in your mind as you see the shockwave hitting back at Florence. The Medici power base has been smashed in Rome, and the people of Florence do not miss that once-in-a-millennium opportunity. On the 16th of May, 1527, the cries of "Liberty, Republic" once again echo through the blue-paved streets. The Medici are expelled, and the Florentine Republic is restored for the third time in history. Your chest heaves with a hope so intense it is painful. At age 58, with shoulders still bearing the scars of the strappado, you feel as if you have been reborn. You rush back to Florence, your feet stepping into puddles left after the rain, your heart full of desire to dedicate 14 years of administrative experience to a government you truly love. You dream of the position of second chancellor, where you once built the militia, where you once wrote the directives that shook Europe. But alas, loyalty is a commodity, and political alliances change like the wind. You enter the Palazzo Vecchio, expecting a warm handshake, but you receive only cold and highly suspicious looks. To the radical Republican faction that has just taken power, you are no longer the hero of the past. You are an object of great suspicion. They look at the prince, which you once dedicated to Lorenzo. They look at the patronage money you received from Giulio de' Medici to write Florentine histories. They look at the missions to reinforce city walls that you did for the dictator. In their eyes, you are a sycophant, an opportunist who has lost the moral standing of a true citizen. How devastating is this juxtaposition? You were tortured by the Medici for your loyalty to the Republic, only to be now driven away by the Republic for trying to survive under the Medici. You want to tell them, "I did everything for Florence, not for the masters." But your words are now just a weak echo in the vast hallways. The council flatly refused your service. They struck your name from the list of those trusted. This blow is heavier than all the strappado sessions combined. It does not dislocate your shoulders. It shatters your will to survive. What happens if a person spends a lifetime studying humans, but in the end is rejected by those very humans? The malignity of fortune has struck down your already exhausted health. June 1527. The sweltering summer heat begins to envelop Florence, but in the small room at Sant'Andrea, you feel a bone-chilling cold. Stomach and intestinal pain. That silent enemy that has stalked you since 1525 now rises powerfully. You are bedridden, feeling life leaving your limbs bit by bit. Around you, there are no kings or ambassadors, only faithful Marietta, your children, and a few rare friends who still visit. You maintain your bitter wit until the very end. You tell jokes about hell, where you would rather be with the ancient philosophers than in heaven with hypocrites. Despite the rumors, you do not die as an atheist. You confess. You receive the holy viaticum, not out of fear of hellfire, but perhaps because you want to find a final reconciliation with this world. You understand that men judge by the eye rather than by the hand, and you do not want to leave an image too extreme in your final breaths. The 21st of June 1527. As the final rays of the sun fade behind the bell towers of Florence, Niccolò Machiavelli breathes his last. You pass away in the silence of the room, carrying the bitterness of one marginalized by the times. You have no idea that the lines you copied in the dark, the pages stained with India ink, will become torches illuminating centuries to come. Your funeral takes place quietly the next day at the Church of Santa Croce. No state funeral, no marching army, no eloquent eulogies. You are laid in a grave without a tombstone, without a clear identity, died in obscurity. A supreme irony. You lie in the Cathedral of Greats, yet like an abandoned anonymous man. But that silence does not last forever. 15 years later, the manuscripts of The Prince and Discourses on Livy begin to be printed with papal permission. And once again, the name Machiavelli shakes Europe. You are placed by the Church on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. Cardinals call you an enemy of the human race. The English call you Old Nick, a nickname for the devil. Your book is considered written by the finger of Satan. They fear you. They fear because you stripped away their hypocritical masks. They fear because you pointed out that there is such a gap between how one lives and how one should live that he who neglects what is being done for what should be done will learn his destruction rather than his preservation. But in the darkness of prohibition, the greatest minds of humanity still find you. Rousseau, Bacon, Hobbes, Spinoza. They read you to understand the nature of freedom and power. You are no longer a fallen secretary. You become the father of modern political science. More than 200 years pass. 1787. A monument of pure white marble is erected right at Santa Croce, on your very grave that once went unmarked. The Latin epitaph shines under the Tuscan sun. So great a name has no adequate praise. It is the belated apology of humanity for a man who dared to look into the darkness to find the truth. You lie there, amidst the stillness of marble, hearing the footsteps of tourists from all over the world. You no longer feel the ache in your shoulders, no longer feel bitter from rejection. You have become part of eternity. Your breath now dissolves into the wind, mingling with the scent of old parchment and eternal India ink. Your eyes close in serenity as the darkness of the Santa Croce Church gradually covers the monument. You feel an absolute freedom, a peace that even the most powerful statesman cannot have. Your hands loosen beside the final manuscript as the sounds of modern Florentine life begin to fade, giving way to the whispers of the Roman greats waiting for your return. You slowly step through the threshold of time, completely shedding the dusty cloak of a turbulent life, to merge into the river of history, flowing toward an endless dawn. The last candle on the desk tilts slightly before a night breeze, then slowly fades out, leaving the room in an absolute silence of nothingness. You lie there, your breath slowing with the pulse of time that is gradually vanishing, feeling a strange relief as all the burdens of glory and bitterness have been cast off. Florence, the city of dreams and pains, now is only a faint streak of light at the end of the horizon of consciousness. You no longer hear the screams of Prado Square, no longer see the contempt of those in power. There is only the whisper of the wind through the pine ridges and the tolerance of Mother Earth waiting for you to return. You have completed your journey. You have dedicated every drop of ink and every breath to the naked truth of humanity. The words you left behind have now escaped the parchment pages to fly into eternity, becoming the guiding stars for those who dare to look into the darkness. Do not worry about being forgotten, for a name as great as yours needs no praise that could be adequate. The silence of tonight is the most majestic monument that history bestows upon a heart that is far too weary. Let consciousness dissolve like pale smoke, drifting along the Arno River, which is quietly flowing toward the sea. You feel your body becoming weightless, like a leaf falling onto a still lake, without a single ripple. The 4 hours of conversation with the ancients have closed. The courts of emperors have now also sunk into eternal sleep. Let your soul be free, far from the schemes, far from the chains of reality, to sink deep, so deep, into the most peaceful sleep you have long awaited. Good night, Niccolò. The world will wake up, but your truth will remain forever in dreams.